Come close now, traveler. The fire is gentle, the stars are steady, and the tide has only just begun to rise. Let me tell you of a girl who did not speak, and a boy who would not stay lost. Of the sea, and the bridge that lies beneath it. But first, let us return to the shore, to the world before the story began. There was a village, small and wind-carved, perched on the cliffs of the sea like a gull resting between waves. It had no walls, for the wind would have taken them, no gates, for there were no enemies, only cottages, low and bowed from years of salt and storm, their windows crusted with memory and mist. The village was called Tarnmore, though no map would bother to name it. It was a place meant to be forgotten by kings and remembered by the sea. And in this village lived a girl called Isla. She was not like the other children. She did not speak, not because her tongue was wounded or her mind dulled. No, she had simply never needed to. The world spoke to her in other ways, in the hush of foam around her ankles, in the creak of wood beneath her steps, in the way gulls paused mid-cry when they passed over her. The villagers said she was strange, but not unkindly. Strange was welcome in a place ruled by tides. She wore a dress the color of sea glass and hair that curled like waves just before they broke. Her eyes were wide, always watching, always listening, especially to her brother, Kale, older by 3 years and brighter by miles. He was the sort of boy who could charm fish into nets and laughter out of clouds. Where Isla watched the world, Kale moved through it, wind in his sails, salt on his skin, and joy in his bones. They were alone, the two of them. Their parents had been taken, not violently, not all at once. Their mother had passed during the red winter, when coughs filled the air like frost. Their father had gone not long after, rowing out into the deep one morning with a full pack and a quiet look. He left no note, but he left them each other, and that, they agreed, was enough. They lived in a cottage near the cliff's edge, where the wind sang songs no one remembered writing. The shutters banged in storms. The garden never quite grew what it was told, but the roof held, and the fire stayed warm, and the sea, the sea, it was always near. Kale fished most mornings, rising before the gulls and returning by noon with a net full of silver and a grin full of mischief. Isla stayed behind, tending the fire, mending sails and listening to the creaks in the floorboards, to the crows arguing on the chimney, to the hum of the tide against the rocks. At dusk, they sat on the steps and watched the horizon together. Kale would talk about the clouds, the shape of waves, the stories the old ones told of selkies and sea kings and drowned gods. Isla would write, not on parchment. They couldn't afford that, but on driftwood, scraps of board, smoothed shells. With bits of charcoal or sea-tinted chalk, she'd sketch the things she noticed. Today, the sea sang like a cradle. A gull landed on my shoulder. I didn't breathe. The tide brought in a shoe with coral growing from it. Kale would read them aloud at night, grinning. You've got a poet's heart, he'd say. Even if you keep it behind your teeth. The village took care of them in its own way. Old Mera left bread on their windowsill. The net menders would nod to Isla when she passed, sometimes handing her a perfectly good scrap by accident. The priest, blind and half-dreaming, said Isla had the mark of the sea upon her. Not cursed, no, just chosen. The sea was their god, their grave, and their gift. And Isla loved it. But she also feared it. She feared the way it changed, how it could be smooth as glass one day and foaming with rage the next. She feared the stories told in low voices, of voices heard beneath the waves, of lights seen in the deep, of those who walked too far at low tide and were never seen again. And most of all, she feared what the sea might one day take, because she had seen it do so before. It was on the 15th day of the grey tide that everything shifted. Kale had risen early, as always. The clouds were low and thick, the gulls silent. Isla had tugged at his sleeve. Her eyes said what her mouth could not. Don't go. But Kale, always grinning, always foolish and brave, kissed her forehead. I'll be back before you know it. And with that, he was gone. She waited on the steps for hours. The wind picked up. The gulls returned. The tide came in, but Kale's boat did not. When night fell, she lit a lantern. When morning came, she lit another. By dusk the second day, they found his skiff, split in two against the rocks. The net floated nearby, empty. The village gathered, murmured, prayed, and Isla watched. She did not cry. She did not scream. She took a piece of driftwood and wrote, "The sea has swallowed my only remaining light." Then she went to the cliff and sat, for 3 nights and 3 tides. On the 4th night she dreamed of a hand beneath the waves, of a voice not heard but felt like warmth against her spine, of her name spoken by lips that should have drowned. Isla, I'm below. She woke with salt on her cheeks, not from the sea, from within. She returned to the tide line every morning after that. She watched, waited. The others whispered, said she was breaking, said she needed to mourn. But she knew mourning was for endings, and something in her heart, something deep and ancient and still, whispered. And so she wrote, "He is not gone. The sea has not ended him. It has hidden him. There is a bridge. I see it when I sleep. The drowned do not vanish. They wait." And somewhere far below, in the deep where no breath can reach, a gate began to open. Slowly, silently, welcoming one who listens. The sea was not silent anymore. It had always spoken to Isla in quiet ways, a whisper through driftwood, a sigh in the gull's wings, the click of stones turned by tide. But now it called with more intent. It had begun to answer her grief. The days grew stranger. The air thickened, as though the tide itself had crept into the lungs of the world. Things once still began to stir. Pebbles moved where no foot had fallen. Shells showed up in perfect rings. Her reflection in the water began to blur, even when the sea was still. It was as if the world had tilted, just slightly, just enough that all her thoughts slid toward the ocean. Each night, she dreamed of the bridge. Not clearly. Dreams rarely are, but always there was water, deep and dark, neither cold nor warm, and always a path, stretching through it, a bridge of strange stone, half-formed and glowing dimly beneath her bare feet. Sometimes she walked it, sometimes she only watched. Sometimes she floated above it like sea foam carried on the breath of the moon, and always, at the edge of the dream, Kale, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, sometimes neither, but always there. He never spoke aloud, but his lips moved. "Come find me." She began writing differently now, no longer observations. Now, maps, symbols, not ones she'd ever been taught. Spirals like whirlpools, crossed lines like fishing nets, tiny boats sketched upside down, a doorway drawn in charcoal again and again, as if her hand remembered something her mind had forgotten. The villagers noticed. They whispered more loudly now. "She's slipping. Her grief has made her mad. She needs a priest, not parchment." But Isla had never lived for their voices. She listened only to the sea, and the sea was changing. One morning, she walked to the tide line and found it covered in jellyfish. Hundreds of them, pale, glowing faintly, unmoving, like fallen stars that had floated too far. She stepped among them slowly. None stung her. None pulsed with harm. They simply waited. At the center of them all was a single object, a shard of green-blue glass curved like a crescent moon, polished smooth on one side, rough on the other, sea glass. She picked it up, and the tide surged. It wasn't a wave, not truly, more a pulse, a breath drawn sharply inward. The water rushed up to her knees in an instant, lifting her slightly, then settled again, as though embarrassed by its own excitement. The jellyfish had vanished, all of them. She looked down at the glass in her hand. It was warm. That night, she pressed the shard to her eye. It was a strange instinct, one not taught, not reasoned, just true. And the world bent. The walls of the cottage became waves. The ceiling rippled with barnacle light. Her skin shone like salt-polished stone, and in the far distance, just beyond the veil of thought, the bridge, clearer than ever before. Now she could see it moving, stones shifting into place one by one, as though sensing her gaze, as if it had been waiting for her to see it. Then, the image vanished, but the shard remained warm, and her heart felt named. She sat by the fire, alone, the village asleep behind her, the sea whispering like a forgotten lullaby. She wrote on a long, pale board, "He is not gone, he is not gone, he is not gone," over and over, until the charcoal broke. The next morning, the tide woman came. She had always been part of Tarnmore, though no one quite knew where she lived. She smelled of brine and wet rope and old salt. Her hair was long, streaked white, tied with shells and black thread. She wore a cloak made of seawolf hide and boots so old they looked carved from drift. She came without knocking, sat across from Isla, said nothing, just stared. Isla stared back. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a kind of speech. Finally, the tide woman reached into her cloak and pulled out a smooth stone. It was etched with a spiral, the exact spiral Isla had drawn in charcoal 3 days ago without knowing why. "You've been called," the woman said, voice like a rope pulled from the deep. "You hear the bridge." Isla did not nod. She did not need to. The woman nodded for her. "Good. Then I am here to remind you of the rules." She laid the stone on the table between them. "The bridge lies beneath, not in the sea but beneath it, in the folds between breath and dream. It is made of memory, walked with silence, and kept by the ones who gave themselves to it." She pointed to the sea glass shard in Isla's hand. "That is your key. But keys are not free." She leaned forward. Her eyes were cloudy, but sharp beneath the fog. "You will find him, but you will not come back the same. No one does." Isla wrote quickly on a piece of bark. "Have you walked it?" The tide woman laughed. A low, gravelly sound. "I did. Long ago. I left something there I loved more than breath." She tapped her chest. "It still hums in me, even now." She stood. "You'll know when to go. The sea will open." And then, like mist before sun, she was gone. The days passed strangely after that. The sea was louder. The wind carried whispers, not words, but syllables half-formed, curling around her ears at dusk. The villagers avoided her now, crossed themselves, muttered about the old gods. Even the priest stopped waving from his chapel steps. She didn't mind. She wasn't part of the village anymore. She was part of the sea. And still, she hesitated. At night, she walked to the cliff's edge and looked down at the black waters. She gripped the shard tight in her hand. The bridge pulsed behind her eyes. And still, she turned back, because fear is not always loud. Sometimes it is a stillness, a quiet, deep resistance, the fear of forgetting, of giving too much, of not returning. What if the bridge took her too? What if Kale was truly gone, and the path only led to grief? What if she failed? What if she succeeded, and no one believed her? She could stay here, let the dream fade, let the sea hold its dead, let the story end. On the 7th night, she stood again on the shore. The tide was high, the stars were pale, and the water had begun to glow, just faintly, just at the edges. A path, soft as breath, shimmered beneath the surface, stone by stone, pulse by pulse. It was waiting. It was open. It would not wait forever. She returned to the cottage and packed. She left no note, only one final message, carved into the beam above her bed. He called. I answered. At the edge of the water, she did not hesitate this time. She stepped in. The sea curled around her ankles, then her knees, then her chest. Then the surface closed above her head, and she breathed in water like air. There was no surface, there was no sky. There was only beneath, and within that beneath, a kind of light. Not sunlight, not torchlight, a softness that pulsed like breath held in the lungs of the world. Isla floated, or stood, or drifted forward on feet that no longer made sound. She could not say which, only that the rules she had known were unthreading slowly, like a net unraveled by time. The sea no longer pulled at her. There was no cold, no pressure, no air needed. She could breathe here, but not with her lungs. Her breath had become something else, something stitched to silence. Her clothes clung to her like seaweed, heavy at first, then weightless. Her hair curled and reached like ink in water, always slightly behind her. The shard she'd brought, the sea glass, had melted against her chest, sinking into her skin without pain. It now pulsed beneath her collarbone, a small steady warmth, as if it remembered something she had not yet seen. She took a step. The world did not move. She took another. The sea stirred. Stone formed beneath her feet, not placed but grown. Smooth as coral, curved like thought, glowing faintly beneath the water's endless blue. It was a path, not wide, not straight, but real and waiting. She walked. She did not know how long. Time here was unmeasured. It passed like the tide, pulling, receding, returning. The farther she moved, the less she remembered how far she'd come. The bridge stretched ahead of her like an idea still forming. She tried not to look down, because there was no floor, only depth, not black, not empty, but full of something vast and aware. The sea here was not water, it was memory. As she walked, the water began to murmur, soft at first, like wind through grasses, but it grew louder. It did not speak words. It spoke her own voice, small, from long ago. Don't leave me, Kale. I'm not ready. Please come home. Please. She stopped. The bridge throbbed faintly beneath her toes, as if listening. The voices rose again, not hers now. The villagers, the priest, the old woman from the tide. She's touched by something unnatural. That girl was never meant to be whole. Strange child, always staring. Let her drift. She turned in place. There was no one, only her. And the echo. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound came from inside. The shard beneath her skin burned hot. She fell to her knees. The stone below her felt like bone. She looked back. The path was gone. Behind her, the bridge had vanished. Nothing but open water. No stones, no trail. Only forward remained. A wave of panic crept in. Slow, cold, final. She had crossed too far. She could not go back. She could not go forward. The sea was a trap. The bridge was a lie. She was drowning in a place that would not let her die. She wanted to scream, but Isla did not speak, and here even silence was swallowed. She curled inward, arms around knees, chin tucked. She began to drift again, not falling, not rising, just drifting into sleep, into surrender. She closed her eyes and dreamed. She was back in the cottage. The fire was lit. Kale sat across from her, mending a net. He looked up and smiled. Bad dream? She nodded. He tossed her a piece of bread. Warm, soft, real. You've always been too deep in your head, little fish. She looked around. Everything was as it had been. The shelf with the shells, the corner with the tangled ropes, the window with the salt lines. Even the journal, her wood slate sketches, hung on the wall, swinging gently from a nail. But something was off. The shadows in the room were too long. The fire crackled wrong, like it was underwater. She walked to the door, opened it. Beyond it, the sea. Not outside, inside, flowing up the stairs. Kale stood behind her now. His face was changing. His eyes darkened. His mouth opened too wide. Stay, he said. Forget the bridge, forget the drowning, just stay. She took a step back. The water surged. Hands reached from it. Her hands, dozens of them, all shapes and ages, pulling her toward the hearth. Stay, 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 she screamed, and woke, floating again. The bridge had returned, a single stone beneath her feet. She was standing. The shard in her chest pulsed again, not burning, but steady. She looked up. A figure stood ahead. Not Kale. Not a drowned soul. A woman, tall, robed, face hidden by a veil of light and seaweed strands. She did not move. She only raised a hand. In it, a mirror. Small, cracked. Isla stepped forward. She looked inside. The mirror showed herself, but older, hair streaked with grey, eyes dull, living in the cottage, alone, still waiting, still listening. No bridge, no dive, just the life that would have been. Isla reached out and touched the glass. It shimmered, then broke. The pieces fell into the sea and vanished. The woman lowered the mirror. She stepped aside. The bridge brightened. The path continued. Isla took a breath. The fear was still there, but now it was part of her. She stepped forward, 1 foot, then another, and the bridge held. Behind her, the figure whispered a single word. Remember, then faded. The world changed again. The bridge widened. The pressure lifted. And ahead, faintly, just faintly, she saw the curve of a gate, made of coral, hung with strands of glowing light. The path curved like a breath held too long. The stones beneath Isla's feet were changing again, no longer just pale or smooth. Now they shimmered faintly with veins of light, like threads of silver running through old bone. When she stepped, they responded, pulsing slightly underfoot, as if the bridge recognized her now. The air, if you could call it that, was heavier, not darker, but thicker, like the hour before a storm. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, the way libraries feel full, or graves, the way old memories feel when someone speaks a name you've nearly forgotten. The coral gate rose like a crown from the deep, immense and still, half grown from the seafloor, half suspended from the dreaming current above. Coral twisted around itself in spirals and arches, some colors bright as fire, others soft as moonbone. Veins of pearl wound through it like river maps. Shells clicked gently in the current, strung between the columns like wind chimes lost beneath the surface. In the center, an arch, a doorway, and beyond it, nothing. Not darkness, not danger, just an open space. A figure stood before the arch, not human, but not monstrous either. Tall, slender, draped in flowing robes that moved like ink in water, woven from seaweed and silk, shadow and salt. Its face was featureless, a smooth plane of glowing opal where eyes should be. Light passed through it like moonlight through thin ice. Isla approached. It raised one hand, palm outward. She stopped. Its other hand slowly reached toward her chest, not touching, just hovering. The shard inside her pulsed. The figure nodded and stepped aside. She passed through the gate. No sound, no shudder, no sense of crossing a line, just a shift, like stepping into a memory that had been waiting for her to arrive. The space beyond was vast, not empty, just uncrowded. The sea opened into a great hollow dome, ringed by arches of stone and coral. Strange lights floated above, bobbing slowly, orbs of bioluminescence, flickering like fireflies in a jar. And all around her moved the builders. They were many, tall and bent, thin and flowing, each one different in shape, but united by one truth. They were not made of flesh. Their bodies looked woven from driftwood and sand, from tide glass and broken nets. Their fingers were long, jointed like crab legs. Their eyes, if they had eyes, blinked not with lids, but with pulses of color. And each of them worked. Some carried thread, long silver, humming faintly, which they strung between coral spires. Others walked barefoot across the floor, pressing glowing stones into place with infinite patience. One sat still, hands cradling a bowl of water that rippled without wind. When Isla peered into it, she saw not her reflection, but a memory. Kale, laughing, tossing a net, calling her little fish. She gasped softly. The builder turned its head toward her and bowed. They did not speak, but somehow she understood. Each of them was stitching the bridge from memory, not theirs. hers, and Kale's, and countless others who had passed this way. Each glowing thread was a moment, each stone a sorrow, each ripple in the water a breath someone once held in hope. One builder approached her now, smaller than the others. It carried a small glass box. Inside, a feather, not a gull's, her own. She had found it once, tangled in her hair after a storm. It had been soft, grey, strange. She had never known where it came from. The builder opened the box and placed the feather on the floor, pressed it gently, and where it touched, the bridge extended. A new stone, a new step, built from a forgotten truth. Isla fell to her knees. Tears did not rise here. They became pearls, drifting upward like pollen. One of the builders caught one mid-rise and placed it on its tongue. Its body glowed briefly. A gift, a taste of memory. It bowed. Then one builder approached with a mirror, different from the one she'd seen before. This one was full, not cracked, not broken. It showed her not one self, but many, not illusions, possibilities. In one, she never left the shore. In one, she went mad with grief. In one, she became the tide woman, old and alone, whispering stories to the waves. In one, a strange one, she saw herself walking the bridge as she was now, but her shadow was Kale's, and he watched her with love and guilt. She turned away. The builders said nothing, but one reached out, gently, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Its fingers were cold and soft as eel skin. She nodded. She would continue. Before she left the chamber, one builder stepped forward again, the first one, the gatekeeper. It carried something, a mask, simple, white, no eyes, made of salt crystal. It placed the mask in her hands and pointed forward. Isla understood. To walk farther, she would need to wear less of herself, not to hide, but to surrender. The mask would hold her name, her shape, her sorrow, while her spirit moved beyond it. She tied it around her face, and at once the world softened again. Her feet lifted. The bridge unspooled ahead like ribbon, and she walked. Behind her, the builders resumed their work, weaving memory into stone, grief into light, hope into bridges that never truly end. And Isla, once girl, now traveler, moved forward not alone, but carried by all she had left behind. The mask was light in her hands, but once Isla placed it over her face, it changed. It became not a thing she wore, but a thing she became. Her breath grew quieter, her steps softer, her thoughts stretched wide and slow, like kelp beneath the current. The path ahead shimmered faintly, as if the bridge were deciding whether to remember itself. Her feet found it anyway, stone by stone, memory by memory. The coral gate lay behind her now. So did the builders, so did the last safe place. She had crossed. At first, the world grew quieter, not silent, not yet, but less defined. There were no edges now, no horizon, no color the way the surface understood it, only tones, blues deeper than grief, greens darker than thought. The light was soft and sourceless, like a sky beneath skin. The bridge curved onward, no longer straight, no longer narrow. It twisted like a song remembered wrong, beautifully, mournfully, full of half-sung notes and forgotten words. And beside it, shadows began to appear. The first one stood still, just off the path, silent, watching. It was shaped like a man, tall, arms long, face obscured by strands of seaweed that drifted though there was no wind. He did not move, but as Isla passed, he opened his mouth. "Do you remember me?" The voice came not from his lips, but from the space around her. Not a question, a longing. Isla said nothing. She didn't remember him. She walked on. The second stood crouched over a pool. A child, hair long and tangled with shells, fingers curled around a piece of driftwood. He looked up as she neared. "I dropped my name," he said. It floated away. Isla paused. She knelt. and from her pouch she pulled a tiny shell, the one Cale had given her when they were children. She placed it beside him. The boy blinked and smiled. "That's a good name." Then he vanished. The pool stilled. They came more often after that. The drowned souls, adrift, unanchored, half-formed and fully lost. Some wept, some whispered, some screamed but made no sound. And Isla, mute and masked yet deeply listening, became something they recognized. She did not run. She did not ask. She did not demand they prove their pain. She simply walked, and when she could, she left something behind. A thread, a thought, a whisper in the water. Small gifts for those who had been forgotten too long. The bridge split, not into two, into many. A fan of paths, spiraling outward in slow, lazy curves. No signs, no guides, just silence. Isla stood still, waited, then removed the mask. Just for a moment. She placed it in her hands, held it to her chest, and whispered, not aloud, but into the rhythm of the world. "Which way remembers him?" The sea answered. One path shimmered gold at the edges. She placed the mask back on and stepped that way. The path narrowed. The water grew warmer. She could feel breathing, not hers, not the drowned, the sea itself. Each rise and fall of the current had a rhythm now, like lungs, like thought, like dream. And with each step, something watched her. Not a creature, not a figure, but an intelligence, old, slow, unblinking. It didn't stop her, but it noticed, and that, somehow, was worse. She passed a tree beneath the sea. Its branches were made of bone, its leaves, old letters, tangled in kelp. They fluttered when she passed. Some bore names, others bore lies. A few whispered her own memories back to her, moments she thought long buried. Cale saying, "You don't have to speak to be heard." Her mother brushing her hair, the moment she found their father's boat, broken and empty. She kept walking. She passed a mirror, not whole, not cracked, shattered, floating in pieces in the water, each shard spinning lazily. Each showed a different Isla, some crying, some silent, one staring back at her with no eyes at all. She did not look again. Eventually the bridge rose, just a little, enough that she could see farther. And there, in the far-off blue, a light, not drifting, not dancing, still, waiting. She walked toward it. The light grew. It became a shape, a structure. Stone, yes, but stranger than anything she'd seen. Not grown, not carved, remembered. It looked like the idea of a lighthouse, the memory of a tower, as if someone had dreamed it too long and it had solidified in sorrow. And at its base, a door. She knocked, because somehow she knew she should. And the door opened. No sound, just a drift of silt. She stepped inside. It was not a building. It was a memory chamber. The walls were made of water and glass. The floor, pages of her journal, unfolding into maps, into drawings, into old lines she'd written and forgotten. At the center, a bowl, still, deep. She knelt before it, looked in. Cale, older, tired, but alive. He sat on a rock at the bottom of a tide pool, staring up at the surface as light shifted above him. He did not move, but she felt him thinking, felt him waiting. He was not lost, not yet. The bowl trembled. A single drop rose from it, lifted into the air, and settled into Isla's palm. It was a memory. His. She saw him, years ago, walking alone on the sand, holding something in his hand. A letter from their father. She had never seen it. He had burned it before she woke. But now she knew. It had said, "I go where I must. Not all love stays." And Cale, 10 years old, had cried into the sea. Alone, she clutched the memory close. The tower faded, and the bridge stretched on. She was deeper now, so deep that even silence had shape. so far that light no longer drifted from above. It came only from within. This, she could tell, was where the drowned came from, where they were born, and where most could not escape. She heard it before she saw him. "You left me," a man's voice, rough with salt, broken with time. I learned. Behind her stood a figure, tall, stooped, faceless, no eyes, no mouth, just driftwood shaped into memory. He pointed at her chest. "You were meant to follow." I waited. She did not know him. She tried to walk on, but he stepped onto the bridge, blocking her. "I was your father." He held out his hand. In it, a torn net. "You never found me." Isla felt the shard beneath her skin grow cold. This was not her father. This was a grief-shaped lie. She stepped forward anyway, took the net, held it, and whispered, not with words, but with will, "I did find you, in the spaces you left behind." The figure crumbled, not into dust, into seaweed, unraveling slowly into the current. The net in her hand vanished, and the path cleared. The second came in the form of a storm. It rose without warning. No thunder, no lightning, just a sudden, choking swirl of ink in the water. The bridge below her began to twist, physically, emotionally. It bent into spirals of memory and regret, leading her past moments she had long buried. Cale crying after their mother died. The look on his face the day their father didn't return. Isla's own face, blank, watching from the corner of the room. Silent, always silent. The ink whispered, "You watched, but you didn't act. You listened, but you didn't save." She stumbled. The bridge spun. The world bent around her like a nightmare trying to wake. Then she reached for the mask, tied at her hip now, a token of the builders, and held it before her like a lantern. It glowed. The ink recoiled. The storm parted, and a new stone formed beneath her. She stepped forward. The third was a child, a girl, pale and perfect, walking the opposite direction on the bridge. She had wide, innocent eyes and a voice like chimes. "You're looking for someone," she said. Isla nodded. "I can take you to him." She offered her hand. Isla took it, and at once, the building around them vanished, and they stood in a vast hall of mirrors. Not glass, water. Each pane rippled with faces. In one, Cale, drowning again and again. In another, Isla, alone on the shore, forever watching. In another, the two of them as children, laughing with no sea at all, only fields. "You can choose," the girl said sweetly. "Just step into the one you like." Isla stared. Each mirror sang a different song. Each offered a different truth. But none of them were hers. She stepped back. The girl frowned. "Aren't you tired of sorrow?" She held out a mirror. In it, Isla and Cale, old and grey, sitting by a fire with grandchildren playing in the surf. "You can have this. No price, no bridge." Isla took the mirror and shattered it against the floor. The girl screamed, not in pain, in rage. Her body twisted, became eel-like, face widening, mouth full of teeth. But Isla was already walking. The bridge returned beneath her feet, and the sea pulled the creature away. The fourth was different. She found him weeping over a broken compass, seated beside a tree with paper leaves. He was a man once, clearly, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, eyes full of sorrow. When she approached, he looked up. "Don't worry. I won't ask you to save me." She tilted her head. He gestured to the compass. "I tried to find my son. Came too late. The bridge showed me what I missed." He smiled, weakly. "But it also showed me this. He knew I loved him. I just never said it." He handed her the compass. "Give it to someone. Doesn't matter who. Just pass it on." She took it, and as she did, the man faded. Not into seaweed, not into dust, but into light, soft, golden. The bridge brightened, and Isla understood. Some souls let go, and in doing so become part of the bridge. The fifth came as hunger, not hers. The path narrowed into a single plank of bone. Beneath it, mouths, Dozens, hundreds. The sea had become teeth. They whispered as she walked, "Give us something you love." One memory, just one. She hesitated, then reached into her pouch, pulled out a stone, round, smooth, the first Kale had ever skipped for her. She held it tight, kissed it, and dropped it into the deep. The mouths fell silent, and the bridge grew wider again. Farther, she walked. The drowned followed, some kind, some cruel, all of them broken in ways that were once whole. She saw pieces of herself in each, and pieces of Kale, but none were him. He was still ahead, still waiting. At last, the bridge leveled. The water above shimmered, and in the distance, the faint curve of another gate. Not coral, not stone, but woven from names, thousands of them, tangled like seaweed, glowing softly. The bridge had tested her, and she had passed. But the price was growing, and the sea was not done yet. Even the bridge grew quiet, not from lack of life, but reverence. It was as though the path itself understood where it was leading, as though it knew this was a place no soul should tread lightly, not even the dead. Ahead lay a forest, but no roots clung to soil, no leaves reached for sun. It was a graveyard, not of bodies, but of names. The trees were tall and thin, made of pale driftwood and rusted masts, each grown from the seabed like regret. Where branches should have been, there hung long strands of kelp script, gently drifting. Names etched into their surfaces, tangled together in a slow, eternal descent. Some names were full, some were broken mid-letter, some were in languages Isla had never seen. All had once belonged to someone lost, not to death, but to forgetting. She stepped forward. The bridge beneath her dissolved into a narrow trail of seagrass and woven memory. It wound carefully between the trees, never once straight. It meandered like thought, like grief. The forest pressed close around her, and the names began to whisper, not aloud, not in any voice, but in the hush that forms between crashing thoughts. They told her who they had been, not through word, but feeling. Snatches of melody, impressions of laughter, the warmth of hands that once held, the echo of oaths made in spring. She felt them pass through her like old wind in broken sails, and then she felt something else. A presence. It was not watching. It was waiting. Something at the center of the forest. Something old and alone. Something forgotten, even by the sea. The pressure built as she walked deeper. The trees grew closer, their limbs more twisted, the names more broken. Some began to bleed ink, dark rivulets drifting upward toward the surface like reverse rain. One tree bore a name she almost recognized, C-A-E. The rest was scratched out. She froze, tried to move, but the path had vanished beneath her feet. The forest was testing her, not with puzzles, with remembrance, the weight of things too heavy to carry, too sacred to abandon. She clutched the compass the sorrowed man had given her, closed her eyes, and let herself feel. She remembered Kale's face the day their mother died, how he had wept into her lap, asking why the gods would take someone who still hummed lullabies, how Isla had not wept, how she had only held him, too young to understand what it meant to be a pillar, too silent to protest the weight. She had been silent for so long. Hadn't she? Something cracked, not in the forest, inside. A breath that had waited a lifetime was finally exhaled. The kelp curled back, and the path returned. She walked on, this time faster. The sorrow didn't lift, but it no longer paralyzed. The deeper she went, the darker the water grew, not with color, but with age. The sea was old here, older than language, older than song, and at its heart there stood a throne. It was not made, it had grown, from coral hardened by time, from the bones of whales, from anchor chains rusted into shape. Around it, the ground dipped into a basin. The roots of the driftwood trees grew downward, feeding into the throne like veins. And seated there, a figure, not man, not woman, not beast, something tall, robed in sea silt and storm scars. Its face was wrapped in kelp bandages, its mouth sewn shut with fishing wire. But from within its chest, a warm glow pulsed slowly, the color of candlelight glimpsed through fog. Isla stepped forward, the throne being raised its head, and though it did not speak, a single word entered her mind. Name. She placed a hand to her chest, felt the shard of sea glass, warmer now than ever before. She did not speak, but in her stillness, her name echoed out all the same. Isla. The being on the throne twitched, gently. 1,000 threads unwound from its bandaged body. One thread drifted toward her. It touched her wrist, and suddenly the graveyard of names bloomed. The trees pulsed with light. The names shimmered like fireflies, and from the basin rose voices, not spoken, not sung, but woven from memory. Not memories of her own. These were the forgotten, the never buried, the ones who drowned with no one to say, he mattered. She lived, they loved. Isla listened, and when she could bear no more, she knelt. The throne being rose, stepped down, and placed its many hands upon her head. She saw Kale, not as he was, as he had been, alone, trapped, beneath the dreaming tide, in a place where names unraveled and memories dissolved. He had not called for help. He had waited, because he had believed, utterly, that she would come. The hands lifted, the throne being stepped aside, and at the back of the basin, between two gnarled roots, a doorway opened. No light beyond it. Only current, only depth, only him. Isla rose. She bowed to the throne, and the sea held its breath once more. The doorway did not lead to a chamber. It did not lead to a hall. It led to nothing. And then, something. A current, soft at first, then stronger. A river within the sea, pulling Isla forward. The mask in her hand began to hum. The shard in her chest glowed like a buried lantern. She did not swim. She did not walk. She drifted. She surrendered, and the sea carried her. She emerged into a place deeper than dream, a hollow cavern of blue and bone where the sea's oldest thoughts slumbered. The walls were ridged like whale ribs, long and curved, ribbing the chamber like the inside of a sleeping god. There was no bridge here, no path, just the stillness of grief. And in the center, a boy, floating, facing upward, eyes half closed. Kale, but not as she remembered. Older than the boy who had wept at their mother's grave, younger than the man who might have grown. Hair like seagrass, drifting in the water. Skin pale, threaded with glowing veins like sea glass marbled through flesh. He was suspended, not trapped, not dying, simply vanishing. The sea had made him part of itself, and not by cruelty, by comfort, by forgetting. Isla swam to him, reached out. Her hand touched his. He flinched. His eyes opened, slow, untrusting. He looked at her without recognition. "Are you the next one?" he said. His voice was quiet, too quiet. "They all come sometimes. Faces I once knew, voices I've forgotten. Are you a dream?" She shook her head, clutched his hand tighter. He frowned, pulled back slightly. "You're warm." His fingers touched the shard, glowing faintly beneath her collarbone. He tilted his head. "That light, I remember it. Once. In a storm." Isla nodded. She pressed her palm to his chest, where his heartbeat should have been. It beat once, faint, then faded. He turned away. "It's peaceful here. No weight, no voice, no need to remember." She swam around him, blocking his path. He looked at her again, and for a moment, something flickered. "You look like someone I loved." He blinked. "A long time ago." His voice cracked. "I had a sister." Isla's chest ached. She pulled the compass from her pouch, held it between them. The needle spun once, then pointed to him. He stared. "That was mine. I lost it. I gave it to..." He stopped. "Isla." He whispered it like tasting a word after years of silence. And she smiled. Tears floated from her eyes, drifting like pearls. He reached toward her, touched her cheek. "You came," she nodded. He shook his head. "You shouldn't have. It's too late. I'm part of it now. The sea, the bridge, the forgetting." He reached out, touched the water around them. "This is peace. There's no sorrow here, no voice, no silence, just—" He closed his eyes. Weightlessness. She took his hand, pressed it to her own chest. To the shard, to the fire. And then, without voice, she remembered him. She sent it into the water. Every moment, every memory. A current of shared sorrow. Kale, showing her how to fish. Kale, braiding seagrass into her hair. Kale, holding her hand when she could not speak. Kale, whispering stories at night. The water shivered. The shard glowed brighter. And within Kale something lit. He gasped, clutched his chest. I remember the fire, the storm, the day I fell." He opened his eyes wide. "You tried to follow me." He looked at her with sudden panic. "Did you drown?" She shook her head. He exhaled, then looked around. "Where are we?" She took his hand, turned, and the sea answered. A bridge began to form behind them, faint at first, then brighter, glowing softly. It had heard her. It had heard them. And it had opened. Kale stared. "You made it here." She nodded. "To find me." Tears ran up his cheeks, drifting into the water. He touched her face again. "You always were stronger." She tilted her head. He smiled. "Not in muscle. In faith." He looked at the bridge. "Do you think it will let us leave?" She squeezed his hand. And, together, they turned and began the walk back. But the sea was not done. The water shuddered, and from the depths, a shape began to rise. It was not a monster, not truly. It was a sorrow given shape, a guardian. It emerged like smoke given form, a vast tendril of ink and memory, bearing hundreds of faces, all of them shifting. Some Isla recognized: her mother, her father, the fisherman from the village, even herself. Each face whispered, "Stay, let go. You've earned peace. The surface holds pain. There is no home left." Isla stood firm, but Kale's grip trembled. "They're not wrong," he whispered. "What if we return and find nothing? What if all we loved is already lost?" Isla reached into her pouch. There was nothing left inside, except one thing, a single page, drawn in ink and love. A picture she had made as a child, of the two of them standing beneath the stars, holding hands. She held it out. The ink cloud recoiled. It hissed, withered, fell back into the depths. The path was clear. The bridge was ready. And for the first time in a long time, Isla and Kale walked side by side, together, toward the light. The bridge was brighter now. It shimmered beneath Isla's feet, like it had never known sorrow. Each stone pulsed gently with soft color. Not gold, not silver, but the light of something living, something choosing to go on. Kale walked beside her, not as he had been when she found him, half gone, half sea, but clearer. A boy remembered, a brother returning. The water around them grew calmer. The pressure of the deep lessened. The sea no longer pulled. It carried. They passed through arches woven from seaweed and song. Old lullabies drifted upward, wordless, weightless, remembered only by the water. Kale paused once, listening. "She used to sing that," he whispered. Isla didn't need to ask who. Their mother's voice had always lived in tide and hush. The lullaby echoed, just once, then faded like breath on glass. Soon, the bridge brought them to a great stone plaza, grown from the sea's memory. Circular, quiet, surrounded by coral that rose like pews in an underwater chapel. At the center stood a pedestal. On it, a small box, bound with threads of gold kelp. Kale stepped forward, paused. "I've dreamt of this," he said softly. But in the dream, I was alone. Isla stood beside him. Together, they approached. The box hummed, softly, like a heartbeat underwater. Isla reached for it, and the kelp loosened. Inside was not a sword, not a relic, but a memory, suspended in a single drop of glowing seawater, perfectly still, perfectly round. It floated above the box like a pearl caught mid-fall. Kale stared at it and shuddered. I don't want to remember that. The drop pulsed, a whisper soft as rain against a grave. It is the memory you buried deepest, the one that makes all others true. Isla didn't move. She felt the shard in her chest flicker. This was not her memory, but it belonged to her brother, to their story, to the wound neither of them had touched. She held out her hand. The drop drifted down, touched her palm, and bloomed. She was 10 again. A storm had taken their father's boat. Kale, only 8, stood on the rocks alone, clutching a torn piece of sail. He was crying, but he wasn't crying for their father. He was crying because he had let him go. The night before the storm, Kale had snuck into their father's boat. He had argued with him, screamed that he was tired of waiting on the shore, tired of being told to stay behind. Their father had promised, soon, just not this one. And Kale had shouted, "Then don't come back at all." Kale had buried the guilt deep. So deep, even the sea couldn't find it. Until now, the vision faded. Isla blinked, tears floating upward again. Kale's hands trembled. "I cursed him," he whispered. "He died thinking I hated him." Isla reached out, took his hand, held it tight, and shook her head. No. She pressed the memory drop back into the box, closed the lid. The kelp resealed itself, this time not as a prison, as a protection. Some truths must be carried, others remembered only when one is strong enough. The pedestal lowered, and in its place rose something new, a light, warm, silent, not a weapon, a blessing, a gift, not for the sea, but for Isla. She stepped into it. It passed over her like a wave, and the shard in her chest, the one that had guided her from the first step, melted into her skin. It became part of her, no longer a tether, but a compass, a truth. She did not need a voice. Her very presence had become one. Kale watched her with wonder. "You always knew the way." She shook her head. "I followed the fire." He smiled, and for a moment there was nothing but peace. The bridge called them onward, not with urgency, with invitation. But now, for the first time, Isla and Kale walked together, whole not because their wounds were gone, but because they were shared. The light still lingered on Isla's skin. It glowed like moonlight caught in dew, subtle and warm. It did not illuminate the sea, but it changed the way the sea felt around her. Gentler, now, softer, as if the ocean recognized her not as an intruder, but as something it had always known and had finally remembered. Kale walked at her side, and the bridge began to rise. Not quickly, not straight, but in a winding spiral ascent through columns of ancient coral, their roots reaching down to forgotten ages, their spires twined with the bones of leviathans and the rusted bells of ships no longer remembered. The sea grew brighter. Shafts of gold pierced the water from above, flickering like the shadows of passing birds. Upward, ever upward, and with every step, something tugged at Isla. Not her body, not her thoughts, her heart. It was the sea's way of asking, "Are you sure you want to leave?" For here, in this place of memory and stillness, there was no hunger, no noise, no cruelty, only the soft embrace of forgetting. They waited. Isla had seen it in Kale's eyes, the peace before she woke him, the temptation of never having to ache again. The bridge shimmered beneath her feet, still strong, but slower, as if the sea were stalling for time. Then came the wind. It was not made of air. It was a current of voices, hundreds, thousands, whispering, not words, moments. A woman laughing beside a boat, a child naming a starfish, a mother singing a lullaby through cracked lips, a boy whispering his name into a tide pool, the lives of the drowned released into the current. They brushed past Isla and Kale like hands grazing fingertips. Remember us, speak our names, carry us to the surface. Kale paused. How could we ever carry so many? Isla reached for the pouch at her hip. It was no longer filled with gifts or tools, only paper. Pages from her old journal, long soaked and faded. She took one, pressed it to her lips, and let it go. It floated upward. The sea accepted the offering. Then another and another. Each page held not names, but intention, the will to remember. The sea stirred. A shape began to rise before them, not a monster, not a guardian. A door, wider than a ship's hull, carved into the wall of coral and woven root. No handle, no hinges, just a question, a choice. Kale stepped forward. The door did not open. The current grew stronger, and a voice rose, not from outside, but from within them. One must stay. They froze, not forever, but long enough for the bridge to remember the way, long enough for those behind to follow. Isla turned to her brother. His face had gone pale. It's asking for a tether, he said. Someone to hold the memory in place, to keep the path from vanishing once we pass through. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet fear. It has to be me. She shook her head. I've just been rescued, he said. You're the one who made it this far. You're the one who found me. You have to take what we've seen back. You have to tell them. He smiled. Barely. You were always the better storyteller. She touched his arm, held it, shook her head. But he stepped forward. The door began to hum. A soft pulse. The sea, recognizing the sacrifice. And then Isla stepped beside him. She took off the mask, the one the builders had given her, held it out, then placed it gently on the stone at her feet. The current swirled. The sea listened. Two entered. One must stay. Isla knelt beside the door, pressed her palm to the stone, and felt the shard within her begin to glow again. She placed her free hand on Kale's chest, then gently pressed the shard into him. Light bloomed around them. The shard passed into his heart. His eyes widened. He gasped, not in pain, in awakening. What are you doing? She smiled, touched her lips, then touched his. Take the voice. He wept. You can't stay. You brought me back. She nodded. I did. Now you must go. The sea brightened. The door opened. Kale stood on its threshold, his skin glowing faintly. He turned, tried to speak, couldn't. The weight of goodbye held his throat still. Isla simply waved. And then the sea took him, not violently, softly, like a mother lifting a child from sleep. The door closed, and the sea was still again. Isla sat at the center of the bridge, alone, but not lost. Above her, the path shimmered, holding shape. Behind her, the graveyard of names waited, and in her chest, a new shard formed, not a wound, a seed. She smiled and began to sing, without a voice, but not without sound. The sea broke, not in fury, in silence, like a great veil being lifted. The surface stirred, the waves hushed, and then a ripple, not large, not loud, but deep enough to reach the bones of the shore. The villagers had long stopped watching the sea. Days had passed since the storm, and grief had grown moss at the edges. But something called them that morning, a sound, faint and unfamiliar, a breath where there should have been only tide, and, from the water, a boy rose. He did not splash. He did not swim. He floated upward, upright, as though carried by unseen hands. His skin was pale, almost luminescent. His hair drifted like seagrass in windless air, and in the center of his chest, just beneath the collarbone, there glowed a soft, golden light. It pulsed once, twice, then faded into his skin. He coughed, fell forward, and the waves carried him gently to the shore. The first to find him was the baker's daughter. She dropped her basket, ran to his side. "It's the fisherman's boy," she cried. "It's Cale." But when the others arrived, the weaver, the smith, the elder with the salt-white beard, they all paused. For though it was him, clearly, something in his eyes had changed. Not madness, not fear, a stillness, as though he had seen the world from beneath, and now could no longer forget its shape. They carried him to the longhouse, laid him on warm furs. He did not sleep, but he spoke little, not because he had no words, but because the words he once used now seemed too small, too loud. He looked out the window toward the sea and whispered once. She stayed. No one asked who, but the sea knew. That night, the villagers gathered, as was their way after the return of a soul. They lit candles, they sang, they laid offerings on the shore, bread, beads, small boats carved from driftwood. And as the tide pulled them back, Cale watched the stars. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with remembrance, and something else, something new. A voice rose in him, not a song, not a word, a knowing. He stood, walked barefoot to the edge of the water, and raised his hand. From his fingertips, the sea shimmered. The waves bent, gently, like listening, and he spoke, not in voice, in glow. From his chest, the light of the shard returned, a thin beam rising into the sky like smoke made golden. It twisted, it wove, and in the air, it formed the shape of a girl, silent, smiling, watching. The villagers wept, for they knew the shape. It was Isla, the silent one, the dreamer, the girl who had watched the waves more often than she watched the world. And now she was the wave, the star, the whisper. Cale fell to his knees, pressed his forehead to the sand, and whispered, "I carry you," far below, in the sea's deepest hush. Isla felt it, not as sound, but as light. The bridge still curved beneath her, though now it faded gently into current. She sat cross-legged on its highest arch, watching the souls of the drowned drift past her like petals caught in a stream. Some stopped, listened, others paused only long enough to smile. She no longer needed to speak. She had become the sea's memory, its flame, its song, and in her hands, something new had begun to form. Not a shard, not a weapon, a quill, carved from coral and inked with the dark of the trench. With it, she wrote in the water, long spirals that floated upward toward the surface, like script released from gravity. Stories, names, wounds, wishes. She would not rise again, but neither would she fade. She had become the one who remembered, and above her, a boy with fire in his heart was beginning to tell. The days after Cale's return were quiet, not hushed with grief, but with a kind of listening. It was as though the whole village had become a conch held to the ear of the world, straining to hear something half-remembered. Cale spoke little, but when he did, it was in images. He told the baker's daughter that her mother, long lost to the sea, still sang lullabies to the driftwood. He told the old fisherman that the star he once named after his wife had sunk below the horizon, not because it had died, but because it wanted to rest, and now it watched from beneath. He told the weaver that her dreams of hands weaving kelp into thread were real, that below the ocean there was a loom of tides. They didn't understand his words, not fully, but they listened, because something in him had changed. The fire in his chest glowed dimly now, visible only in twilight. But his eyes had depth like the sea, and when he held someone's gaze too long, they saw their own memories return. Forgotten laughter, old wounds, the smell of brine and childhood. Even the children noticed. "I dreamed of a bridge," one boy whispered, after sleeping near Cale's fire. "It was made of stone and driftwood. It led to my grandpa. He told me not to be afraid." Another child said, "There was a girl with no voice, but she could write on the water." A third simply said, "The sea feels different." Cale did not preach. He did not shout. He planted seeds, soft ones. A story here, a gesture there, a long pause where once he would have rushed to fill the silence. He had learned from Isla that silence was not absence. Silence could be the start of everything. Soon, villagers began to return to the water, not to fish, not to forget, but to remember. They sat at the shore in the hour before dawn, feet in the tide, hearts ajar. Some brought flowers, some brought poems. One carved a statue of Isla from driftwood, small, graceful, eyes closed, and placed it atop a rock where the waves kissed it daily. And the sea responded, not with waves or storms, but with dreams. People began to speak of visions, of soft light in their sleep, of memories long buried bubbling up like warm air from the sand. One man awoke weeping, holding a lock of hair he hadn't seen since his daughter drowned. A woman who had forgotten how to paint began again, this time using seawater and salt and crushed shells. Her pictures shimmered. One of them showed a girl beneath the waves, sitting cross-legged on a glowing path. The elder called a meeting. By firelight, the village gathered. Cale stood beside the hearth. He did not speak. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a piece of paper, old, crinkled, written in ink, made from squid ink and memory. It read only, "What we forget, the sea remembers," and below that, in faint blue lines, "There is a bridge. She is still there." A hush fell. One child reached for the paper. Cale let them take it. Another villager stood. "Should we tell others?" Cale thought, then nodded, not because he wanted fame or followers, but because the bridge was not only for him. Isla had built it with her journey, her silence, her sacrifice, and now it must stretch further. So they began to speak to other villages, to travelers, to wandering bards and windburned sailors. They didn't tell them everything, just enough. A name, a story, a whisper that there was something beneath, waiting to be remembered. And slowly, slowly, the world began to listen. On the farthest shore of the Northern Isles, a child awoke from a dream and asked, "Can I send a paper boat to the bridge?" In the eastern harbors, merchants began carving tokens of sea glass and giving them to their children. For safe passage, they said. If ever you drift too deep, and among the coral reefs of the south, divers claimed to hear laughter when they sank beneath the waves. Laughter not mocking, but familiar. A current had begun, small, invisible to maps, but felt the sea had always taken. Now it was giving back, and Isla, though unseen, was the reason. Below, in the deep hollow of the sea, she wrote still. Her quill traced the water, each loop a name, each swirl a memory returned to its rightful bearer. Her hair floated like kelp in the stillness. Her skin shimmered like pearl in moonlight. Her silence was no longer absence. It was invitation. And once, just once, she looked upward, toward the world above, and smiled. The world did not shift all at once. There was no trumpet call, no star falling from the sky, no monument raised in Isla's name. But something had changed. In the village where Isla and Cale had been born, the children stopped throwing stones into the tide pools. They began placing offerings there instead. Feathers, petals, broken toys made whole with string and seaweed. One child laid down a note written in crooked script, "Tell her I remember the story." They did not always know her name, but they knew someone had waited beneath the sea and built a bridge from silence. They knew she had chosen love over return. They did not know the word for sacrifice, but they felt it. At night, mothers began telling bedtime stories a little differently. They no longer said the sea was only for sailors and storms. They told of quiet girls who went deeper than anyone before them and found not monsters, but memory. They told of bridges made not from stone, but from sorrow carefully carried, of songs sung without sound, of sisters who lit the way home. One village carved a small statue near their well. It showed a girl seated cross-legged, a quill in her hand, water swirling around her. There were no inscriptions, only the shape. And somehow, it became known that if you had a name you wanted remembered, someone lost or someone yet to be, you could whisper it to that statue. and the sea would carry it down. Cale never left the village, not fully. He did not sail again, but he taught others how to listen. He walked the shores each morning and left trails of inked shells behind him. Messages to no one, or everyone. You are remembered. The silence loves you. There is no such thing as gone. Look deeper. People followed them, not as pilgrims, but as fellow wanderers. And in time, they started writing their own. The village became known for something strange, its dreams. Travelers claimed that sleeping there led to vivid dreams of bridges, of golden kelp, of a girl seated at the edge of time. Dreams that left them in tears, dreams that healed something unnamed. Scholars came, at first to dismiss the rumors. Many stayed. One wrote, "We came searching for science. We left with our hearts rewritten." And far beyond that village, far beyond the original tide, the ripples spread. In the west, a young girl afraid of the ocean placed her drawing of a boat into a bottle and cast it into the waves. That night, she dreamed of a voice, not heard, but felt, saying, "I'll sail beside you." The next day, she learned to swim. In the north, an old man who had never spoken of his grief finally whispered his wife's name into the wind. He felt a warmth wrap around his shoulders, and he smiled, alone, but no longer lonely. In a land far inland, where no seas touched the horizon, a child dug a small pond in her backyard. She filled it with rain and fish and placed a small paper figure in the center, a girl with long hair and a smile made from ink. "This is her home," she said. The bridge, unseen, had grown, not just beneath the sea, but beneath the skin of the world, beneath grief, beneath fear, beneath every hush that had once felt like emptiness and now felt like invitation. Some said the sea had softened, that storms struck less fiercely near that village, that whales returned to old roots, that divers came back changed. Some said it was superstition, but none of them could explain the coral, in the shape of a girl's face, found 30 fathoms below, nor the songs that recorded themselves without source on wind-worn parchment. Cale aged. His fire never quite left, but it quieted, lived beneath his ribs, like a coal, not a torch. When he grew old, he no longer told stories aloud. He wrote them on driftwood, then cast them out. Each one sank. Each one found her. And Isla, she sat still, beneath, writing, scribing, not just names, not just memories, but possibility. She watched the forgotten find voices, watched the lost get carried home. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her bridge, born of silence, now carried sound, and that was more than enough. Years passed, quietly, kindly, like the hush between waves. The village by the sea did not grow much larger. No towers were built, no monuments raised, but its edges softened. Its people learned to listen more, speak less, grieve slower, love longer. They came from far and wide, not in crowds, but in currents. Wanderers, dreamers, mothers with children, sons without fathers, people who had lost something they could not name. They left paper boats on the shore. They sang songs they didn't remember writing. They sat in silence and wept and felt no shame. And above them all moved Cale, older now, his hair streaked with grey, his shoulders weathered by salt and story. He lived alone, but not in loneliness. He lived with the sea. Each morning, he walked the shore. Sometimes he stopped to speak to the statue of Isla, carved in driftwood, seated in stillness, a smile on her face. Other times he simply nodded, as though she were a neighbor, watching from the porch of the tide. He did not dive anymore. The sea had given him back, and he honored that gift by staying above. He wrote, he remembered, he lit small fires by the shore and left blank pages in the sand, letting the wind and water write their own stories upon them. But as the years turned, the sea began to change, not in violence, in withdrawal. The tides grew gentler, the storms fewer, the kelp forests deeper, quieter. Those who dreamed of the bridge began to say, "It's harder to find now. It feels further away." Some grew afraid, others simply nodded, as if the bridge had done what it was meant to do and now wished to sleep. Cale felt it too, a stilling, a slow hush, a weightless parting of paths. One night, under a moon so full it touched the sea like a coin on silk, Cale returned to his cottage by the cliff's edge. He sat by the hearth, a small fire, a bowl of broth, a book of notes, sketches of coral, diagrams of the bridge, a child's poem scrawled in the corner. She is the tide, and the tide is her. He smiled at it, then set the book aside, and slept. That night, he dreamed, but it was not a dream like the others. There was no bridge, no glowing shard, no laughter in bubbles, only the sound of a woman's voice, low and clear, and not quite human, whispering his name. Cale. His eyes opened. The room was quiet, the fire low, the sea beyond the window still. He sat up, breath caught in his throat. Then, "Cale," the voice said again, this time closer. In the room, he turned, and there, in the threshold between firelight and moonshadow, stood a woman. Not young, not old. Her skin shimmered like wave foam under starlight. Her hair moved as if underwater, though no wind touched it. Her eyes were not the color of sea or sky, but something older, a color without name. She did not speak. She looked, and he knew. "Isla," he whispered. She smiled. It was not the smile of his sister, nor the girl who had followed him into the deep. It was the smile of the sea itself, soft, immense, sorrowful, and eternal. She stepped forward. Her bare feet left no mark on the floor. Her hands, graceful, webbed at the edge like tiger leaf, reached out, and in them were the stories of the drowned, carved into her palms, written in the curling script of water. Cale stood, unsteady, not with fear, with memory. "You stayed," he said. She nodded once. "You watched." She nodded again. He wept. She stepped closer, placed her palm to his chest, the place where the shard had once glowed, and for a moment, it glowed again, just once, a pulse, a heartbeat, a memory waking. "Why now?" he asked, voice trembling. "Why return?" She didn't answer with words. She turned, faced the window, and beyond it, the sea began to rise, not with destruction, but invitation. The waves stood still, tall and glass-like, revealing beneath them the shimmer of something ancient and vast. The bridge, still there, but not for all, only for him. One last time, she turned back to him, tilted her head. Her voice, when it came, was the sound of tide over shell. "The bridge will sleep soon, but not yet. Will you walk it with me? Once more?" He hesitated, looked back at the fire, the walls, the home he'd built, the world he'd helped soothe, and then, at her, his sister, his guide, now the tide woman, not myth, but memory made flesh. He took her hand. It was cool, weightless, strong. She led him out the door, down the cliff, onto the still water. They did not sink. They did not float. They walked, and beneath their feet the bridge rose, not built of stone this time, but of story, of paper, of every name ever whispered to the sea, every tear, every offering, every song. He looked at her. She looked ahead, but her fingers gripped his tighter. They walked far, farther than memory, farther than even grief, until the stars themselves bent to watch, until the wind stopped breathing, until the sea was no longer sea, just light, and hush, and her. They stood at the edge of the world. He turned to her. "Is this the end?" She said nothing, only closed her eyes, and, with a final breath, stepped forward, and dissolved, not into mist, not into shadow, but into the sea itself. She had become it, not a girl, not a ghost, not even a goddess, but the thing beneath all stories, the part of the world that waits, and weeps, and holds, and remembers. Kale stood alone, smiled, and whispered, "I'll tell them," then turned and walked back down the bridge, toward the world, toward waking, toward morning. The next day, they found him on the beach, eyes closed, a smile on his face, a page beside him, empty except for 5 words, "She is the tide now." And from then on, when children asked where Isla had gone, their mothers said, "She didn't leave, she became the water." And when you're quiet, truly quiet, you can still hear her writing, "She is the tide." And so ends the tale of the bridge beneath the sea, the story of a girl who gave up her voice to find her brother, and in doing so, gave it to the world.